It is 8 a.m., so I will call our meeting of Tuesday, August 3rd to order. And if we would please, we'll start by honoring our country with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Jana, you have the floor, please.
Okay, so the first thing on our agenda is reviewing the property tax levies and the circuit breaker credits. So I sent an email out to you guys for your packets of all the levies that the DLGF, Department of Local Government Finance, is estimating for us to have in property tax levy, which is the max amount that we can collect in property taxes in order to go towards our revenues. And then the estimated property tax cap impact report. So for our taxes, there is a 1% cap, a 2%, and a 3%. So homestead values, what this means is out of all the properties in the county at a 1% cap, their property value or their property taxes can't go over 1% of what it was the previous year in each one of those categories. So that I was just reviewing the property tax impacts that these tax caps will have on the county. So and then per our DLGF rep, it just says at the first meeting of the county fiscal body in August, the county fiscal body shall review the following, which is the levy limits and then the tax caps, and then the county fiscal body must the county fiscal body has held the meeting and they may prepare and distribute a written recommendation for taxing units in the county. If the county fiscal body does not prepare a written recommendation, the minutes of the meeting held under this section shall be distributed by the county auditor to all taxing units in the county after the minutes have been approved by the county fiscal body. So if you guys don't make any recommendations or changes, then, which we have never have in the past, it's kind of like what a non-binding review used to be, then I just distribute the minutes that you made, no recommendations for any changes.
Would you like to go a little bit deeper to bring everybody up to speed on why this conversation and why we've got to this point as far as what your fear of projections are?
This is just, this is separate from, I mean, it is kind of, it does have to do with the budget, but it is separate. It's just looking at all the units, and then if you don't recommend any changes for them, then we just need a motion that you're not making any recommendations for any changes, and I'll put that in minutes.
And the budgets, the other units are proposed are all within the DLGF guidelines.
Yep, and DLGF will meet with each one of them and go through that with them, so.
So I make a motion, we make no changes to the other units levy and taxing structure. That's what that sheet's about. I think a lot of us are looking at a different sheet than what you're talking about, because you gave us the sheet with the circuit breaker impact. And I think a lot of us are looking at the county general and are not seeing those particular numbers for the different units in front of us.
Okay. Yeah, that sheet.
Right.
And then the property tax levy, that was a big one I sent in your email. But I did not send out because it would have cost a lot of postage, so. But I did send it in the email for your review.
Janet, your recommendation goes along with the motion.
I'm sorry.
In this sheet, your recommendations go along with what Tim made a motion of.
Um, Yeah,
that
that
we
to not
not
make any,
Make
yeah.
any recommendations for changes.
I'll second Tim's motion.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion, please.
The more I learn about the structure, unless something is really out of line, we really don't have an impact. DLG may come back to us and say, hey, this was in error. They can't do that. And then we would have to change it as well, but they would bring the change to us if I understand it correctly.
That's my understanding. Is that accurate? Yes.
Thank you.
We'll go to the vote. All those in favor, please respond by raising your right hand. And those opposed, the same. Let it be shown it passed unanimously with all board members present. Did you have anything else?
Pertaining to that.
Okay. Scott, you have requested to give a report today. If you'd like to come forward, please, and share with us what you have.
Scott Wagner, Health Department. Dr. Burke and I are here today. Probably bad timing. But we've been given notice from the state WIC office that they're reducing numbers and hours for everybody there. And to the point where we're not going to have full-time person anymore. And so in order to retain those individuals in our office, we'd like to come back at the end of August with and ask to transfer grant monies and also make a change to our budget for fiscal 2022 to retain these individuals in our office. Otherwise, if they go to part-time, they'll probably not stay with us. They're saying that the state, they've changed their structure for budget this year and everybody's numbers are down because of COVID. So they've been completely unnumbered and not looking at performance. We've had the #1 breastfeeding department in the state for over 10 years. And now they're telling our person that does that they can't do their job and they can't go higher because they have certain credentials. And so we're hoping to add to that person's hours as well as keep Sarah at full time. So we'd like to come back at the end of the month with a specific dollar amount for you to review. We'll be talking with the commissioner of that division next week in a meeting. And also I've reached out to our congresspersons as well at the state. We are still on the hold for monies from WIC of last year as well, 2020, right, Jana?
Sorry.
We're still waiting on WIC to pay us from last year. The state's got it. The state altogether is just afraid to commit to anything until the feds give them whatever. So
And how many employees will this affect?
we have 5 employees right now. It would affect 2
Okay.
of our 5. So when we hired Sarah on 2 years ago, full time, now they would drop her down significantly below federal standards, so she wouldn't even be qualified. And then Danielle, who's a breastfeeding coordinator, who usually has taken over in times when we haven't had a coordinator, she would have her hours reduced as well.
Scott, if they hold the WIC funds through the whole fiscal year,
We don't
Yep.
want to-
which might not be a surprise at this point in time, how would you balance that budget? Where would you take the funds from so that you balance for the
Well,
year?
we'd do as much as we can with the grant money, then we'd ask for money out of our cash balance that's unseen.
I guess what I'm trying to get is that you'll have potentially money next year out of the 20 payment for WIC
That's right.
to cover this potentially, right? Okay.
Just asking that I can come back in August with that. Sounds okay, you guys.
Is that money, when you recover it, something that can be transferred back
Once we
to
spend this grant money, it's gone.
the money you're waiting on?
Oh, no, the money we went on, yeah, I mean, it would go right back into coffers for WIC. It's just right out there. So up until this point, we've never supplemented WIC before at the county level. But we're seeing statewide, other agencies are starting to have to supplement because the state's dropping the ball. We can't get qualified people. We can't offer them hours and insurance and things like that. And so that was our problem last time. We went almost 2 years without a director because nobody wants to work part-time and not have insurance. And so we finally was able to get a full-time job, and now they're going to drop it. I'm trying to impress upon the individual at the state that these are county employees. We just can't go from year to year changing their hours and operation hours of the clinic and whatever suits their needs. You know, we want to maintain, you know, a smooth transition from year to year. So that's our issue right now.
And may so the 9,000 or the money that we're actually receiving from the state is money that we have already spent in the WIC fund. I just want to make sure, so we get reimbursed. It's not in advance, it's a reimbursement grant. So I just want to make sure that was, everyone understands that.
How many total dollars are you thinking?
Well,
Roughly.
right, so since their fiscal year starts October 1st and goes through September 30th, it's different than the calendar year. So for the rest of this year, we would use grant money only to finish that out, whatever hours that would be, whatever we would need to do there. For next year, I would think it'd be about 40,000. But I'll get you a more specific number. After our meeting with the commissioner down there, if there's any movement we can make, then I will be able to adjust those hours. Right now, they're trying to take her down from 35 hours to 23. So obviously, she doesn't meet federal standard for full time, so.
It appears with what you've been carrying cash balance wise that you can absorb that.
I think so. I think we can do that, put a supplemental line item in there under our normal budget to help them every year for a while. I think that should be okay. We try to be conservative, not, you know, be above our britches.
I think we all agree this is a valuable program and has helped countless families in our community.
All right, thank you, Scott.
Thanks.
Next item on the agenda is in 2022 maximum levy amounts and general budget.
Okay, so everyone received this new handout. I was just asked to go back and give a couple options of our max levy. As you can see, our max levy amount, working max levy amount per our DLGF rep is $6,898,133. So if you guys want to review that and have any questions.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to explain to the general public that we get two estimates from the state, from two different departments. And we developed a budget based on the estimate that was given to us earlier in the year. And now the department that will actually control our budget has reduced the amount that we can estimate for our max levy. So we're being forced to rework the budget based on these lower numbers. And Mr. Chair, some of us sat with the auditor, and then there were three of us, so it was a legal gathering to put together some pieces to suggest how we can get to the number, because not only do we have to maintain the number that DLGF gives us, we also have to maintain a balance that they require.
That they recommend.
Yeah, recommend, that's a better word, yes, recommendation. So We've talked with some department heads, and there's some department heads that have been carrying a balance that's higher than they now think is necessary in their accounts, and some are making some sacrifices. So we have a recommendation, which on the green sheet, they're based there. Just some summary numbers. Community corrections is able to reduce their budgeting because they are running at a lower capacity than they have been. Are there things that you would like to bring to us?
Just in addition to my email, just really when I present budget, it's just a guesstimate, of what our numbers will look like going forward, because we are still doing COVID. Our grants have maintained the same, as far as what we receive for grants, but our budget income is where we, took the hit because our population went down. And why we're staying at 50, that's still not at 85, the way we were before COVID. But we still have to quarantine them. They can't go to work, they can't pay their user fees. But we do have a good balance. I'm out of the red. So when I was contacted on Friday, I looked at those numbers. Again, it's just a guesstimate. I can't say we're going to stay at 50. I feel comfortable with the number I gave on Friday that we can reduce our budget this time at that amount.
So Paula, the number she gave us was to reduce the budget by 280,000 for her department, because there is revenue. It's just not what it should be, but it's more than what you had to budget for. So Jim and Kim talked. Do you want to?
Sure. And
And
Kim,
Kim, anything you have to say?
please, don't be afraid to comment. And that last Friday, we worked a little bit on looking at the budget because the county itself has a $400,000 shortfall on revenues that we've been made aware of. I went around and asked the auditor to check with surrounding counties to see what their revenue in that income tax area had done. About half of them stayed the same. About half of them was like us, had significant drops in that portion. So 400,000 is quite a bit. And then Paula's budget request, and I understand what you're saying, Paula, on yours, put that. So we were looking at about a $1 to $1.1 million swing on lost revenue or additional expenses. And then I think the projected cash balance for the county was potentially could drop from 4 million to 2.3 million in 1 year. And we've been carrying a very good balance. So we certainly have to take some actions to try to halt that. I guess a year from now, we'll know if that happened. So we looked at areas of where we could possibly cut, and in some cases, and I'm sure we're going to be doing it more, balances that departments carry in their cash balance account. And one thing we noticed is that the assessor's office is carrying, for reassessment, is carrying a pretty high cash balance, well above what reassessment costs every year. And what she's collecting on the tax levy is almost 2 times what her cost is per year. So I went up, called Kim and asked if I could talk to her, and told her what I was coming to talk about. And she had gotten some information around, and I think we had an extremely good discussion yesterday. Because with her account, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, when those funds go into her account, they can only be used for reassessment. They can't come back to county general or anything like that. And so with high balance she was carrying, almost 3.5 times what her yearly assessment is, plus she gets those yearly assessments. We asked for her if we could get that balance down, still give her some working space in there, and that. So we worked on that. she brought me figures clear back to 2014. And actually in 2014, it was somewhat of a similar case because her balance was about 1.2 million then. It's about 1.3 now. And it appears to me that county council did the same thing back then. Wouldn't you agree with that, Kim, that they reduced your collection or the money that you got and reduced your balance down yearly because it went from 1.2 to in 2018 down to 555,000?
If you would,
Yes.
please, yes.
In office, I started looking at the reassessment fund. Number one, because, and I told Jim yesterday, in 2014 was when we started the state changed the legislation to do our cyclical reassessment. We were on a 10-year cycle with reassessment prior to that. And so when we went to cyclical reassessment, everything then became to where, you know, if you were contracted with a vendor or whatever expenses you had for reassessment were then paid on a yearly basis versus that 10-year cycle that we used to be on prior to that change. So that's when that big deposit was made into reassessment at that time, because that apparently that was a carryover from not having paid for a 10-year reassessment for quite a while. So then that's where that hefty deposit came from in 2014. When I come into office and started looking at this fund, then there was a reduction in the levy for several years. It started basically, could take it back to 11 pay 12 when they started reducing the levy even prior to that cyclical change. And then I put together like a 5-year plan for the fund. And it was being reduced every year more than, we were not taking in the amount to cover the expenses that were going out. So I put together yearly the amount that it was not going to be covered for those expenses. And it ended up, it was a shortfall of like 661,000 that it was not being covered. And then in 2017, pay 18, there was nothing. The levy was totally cut, so nothing into that fund. And I expressed that to Jim yesterday. I know it's got a pretty large balance in it now. I would not want to see it reduced to nothing, not at all. I mean, number one, we don't know where we're headed reassessment wise. Our costs can continue to go up. Vendor wise, we contract that out. All those services for trending reassessment, our ratio study. Their expenses may go up. It would take one appeal here on the commercial level and decide to bypass our Property Tax Assessment Board of Appeals and go straight to the Indiana Board of Tax Review. And that could really put a hurt on a county our size. I would not want to see that happen. I pray it happens after I'm gone, if it happens. But yeah, that in that aspect of it, that can cost the county a lot of money. So therefore, that's something that money would have to come from somewhere if it wasn't in that fund.
So what, I think the last year or so, she was getting 700,000 and her reassessment cost was on about 400,000. So that fund will continue to grow. And I think what you showed me that potentially you have possibly more revenue coming in, so that could grow even more. So much aware of sometimes emergencies in departments or a suit and that. So we talked a little bit about where maybe that her carrying balance could be, that she would be comfortable. And we've kind of, I threw out a figure and she thought she could live with it yesterday. That might have changed overnight, but about 750,000 in that account and try to maintain that balance plus her annual assessment. And then, you know, then that balance and that should take care of emergencies. If not, we're still going to need to fund her no matter what, because that's very important department as far as revenue for the county and doing it right for the taxpayers and so forth. So it's fair there. But that's if we can work that count down, that could be a savings of $600,000 or so on that budget, or dollars just sitting there not being used for anything. But we certainly don't want to shorter, but we also do not want that money to accumulate and just sit there. So as of yesterday, we had kind of tentatively agreed that maybe we could work somehow with the State Board of Accounts, work that balance down, because there is statutes on how this has to be funded, and then reach that goal of 750 plus her annual assessment, and try to work these balances down and keep that tax rate down for our citizens.
So what we're proposing is to, over time, rather than taking the whole chunk in 1 year and then what do we do next year, is reducing the levy to possibly $200,000. We're going to have to get an interpretation from the state of an ordinance or of a part of the legal description of what has to happen, or $400,000 if we are in fact required to every year fund the entire cost. So that's slowing the growth and taking some of the accumulation each year for the next 4, potentially 5 years, depending on how much the growth is, to get to that 750,000 approximately that Jim and Kim discussed.
And I told her that we need to review this 1 year at a time. And because we don't know exactly how these figures are going to land. And I told her that would only be fair to review that every year and see how that's doing. So.
And with the reassurance that if there is a lawsuit or an emergency, we're going to have to step up and fund it.
I expressed to Jim yesterday, and this is the first I'm hearing of a figure of reducing to 200,000, which 200,000 would not cover what's coming out of reassessment in a year's time. So that's a concern to me.
Well, but it reduces your carrying balance is what it does. That Tim and I and Tom talked about that afterwards, come down and Tim was here, he'd been to the commissioners meeting, and we didn't know if we should take you down to 0 or give you some every year. So we talked about that afterwards. But so that would be, instead of getting that count down in 2 years, it might be a 5-year deal that we gradually work that down, much like they did in 2014.
And it caused it to fall short of what was coming out. My only thing with that is, and I told Jim yesterday, I think Matt may have to give us some interpretation of the way the statute reads, because with the way this reads, section B of 6-1.1-4-27.5 states that with respect to a reassessment of real property under a county's reassessment plan, under section 4.2 of this chapter, the county council of each county shall, for property taxes due each year, levy against all taxable property in the county an amount equal to the estimated cost of the reassessment under this section 28.5 of this chapter. So he's going to have to get, I feel, some clarification there as to what that actually means.
And that's why we put the 2 and the 4, because if at 4, you just we'll just cover cost and not increase the accumulation.
Right.
At 2, we will start to work down the accumulation. So that's why we put those 2 numbers there. If that makes sense, council members?
But that's one thing that we are going to be looking at, because this raised eyebrows with cash balances that some of these accounts have that really doesn't move and doesn't need to. If we accumulate this in here, then it just sits there because it has to be used for reassessment. It just sits there every year, and And we can't allow that to grow, really. It just,
Yeah, and we know by law it cannot be removed from there. So
I
if it
told
grows,
Jim,
it's money that's just not available. It's taxpayer money that is sitting in an account.
over the
because it doesn't
weekend,
cost
I
us.
thought about this and I told Kim, I thought, well, we pre-funded you. We funded you early. You know, that's my take on the statute, that we did fund you. We just funded you early. So, but we do have to get with the State Board of Accounts and Matt and see how we can do this.
And personally, I want to thank you, Kim, for bringing the numbers to Jim so that it makes sense and your willingness to take that risk.
I mean, we all know it's extremely important, and it's even above me. I mean, this is, it's all written in the statute and what has to be followed, and
Right.
it's very important that we do that. And, you know, I don't want to see it dwindle down to nothing. That's my thing. You know, it's too important. We don't know where costs are going to go. Vendor costs especially. I have no plan of becoming a county that wants to tackle this whole process ourselves. It would mean a really large increase in staffing and salaries and benefits and, you know, so I don't want to go that route, but. So this year then, are you still proposing that you're going to possibly propose something then going into 2022? That's your plan?
Yeah, I think with our budget situation, I think we need to. So we're gonna find out here pretty shortly what, you know, how we need to go about this.
Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate to note in the minutes that our intention is not to let that balance fall below a certain amount of the 750,000 that was discussed?
I believe you just did.
Thank you.
Yep.
Parliamentary procedure. The other place where we were able to,
Thank you.
yeah, thanks, Kim. We looked at the health department's balance, and it fluctuates significantly. And we understand the need to maintain a balance. But we believe that the health department can sustain a $100,000 reduction in their levy and live off of their balance to be reviewed again annually. And we recognize that anytime we change this, it changes the rate. So we're going to have to go through the process with the commissioners and the council to reestablish the rate next year again.
And that was going to be my question. Have we done anything as far as determining what these rates will be or what they'll lower them to and how that'll, we're talking dollar amounts, but do we know what the rate's going to be?
We have not done that yet.
But the total rate remains the same because we're going to use that additional in general.
Right.
Okay.
It'll just get moved. That's what I'm
Right.
asking. What? Scott, and I know you want to talk, so you have the floor.
Yeah, obviously, the health department's usually a pretty quiet department. You don't usually hear too much from us. But obviously, with the last 2 years, we became pretty prominent. And just so you know, we needed every person this last 2 years in our department to function. We could have done it. In fact, we probably could have used another person since I put in quite a bit of overtime the first 5 months of this year. Practically took another full-time person to do that. So just so you're aware of that obviously we borrowed from the health department fund before. We try to be conservative, and I'm sure that they'll be paid back and they'll be maintain our balance. Just so you know, we have a 5-year plan, and that does include more staff somewhere down the road, especially if the economy continues as it is, if building continues as it is, as we grow, there's just going to be a need for additional people at some point. So you're aware.
Scott, if I can just address a couple of terms, we're technically not borrowing.
No, that's right.
And we're technically not going to pay back, but
Right.
it is the intention to increase the levy again as we're allowed. There are 2 other things that we're proposing. Actually, 3 other things. One is a 2% pay increase for all employees and a 2% budget reduction from all departments that have not been affected by these larger concessions. And then the third is the cumulative bridge fund. We established a rate of 0.0534. And one thing we would ask you to consider is an option 1, which reduces the rate to 0.045 and makes about a $140,000 difference in that fund. And we're reluctant to do that. But if you will look at the first sheet, it's the impact that it has on our cash balance. And if you can explain those 4 options for us, Jana.
So yeah, option 1 is, again, so the 728,894, that's with County General being at the 5.1, Cambridge being at the 0.045, and then reassessment being at the 200,000, and then that says reassessment 200,000. Then option 1, again below that for 528,894 is the reassessment. Is that the Cambridge thing the same but reassessment at 400,000? That's that $200,000 difference there for option 1. And then option 2, it's with the Cambridge rate at the higher rate. So it obviously would decrease the cash balance. And then that's with reassessment at 200,000. And then option number 2, same thing with Cambridge on the second page, but with reassessment at 400,000. So that is what those numbers are.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the DLGF's recommendation for balance on a county our size is about 800,000.
No, that's, they projected that 4 years ago when John and I worked on it, we were at 800,000. And they projected that we were probably only at about 50, or they suggested that we were only about 50% of what they would like to see in reserves. They would like to see anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million at that time. That's
Okay.
kind of dated information. I can only imagine that that's increased, but we have been able to be
Yes.
diligent with that. And in the 4 years since we met with the State Board of Accounts and were informed that we were probably a little bit low, we currently set as of today at 3.7 million with a projected end of the year of around 2.3 million compared to the 800,000 that we were at. So we've been trending in the right direction, and we're probably with that projected 2.3 million, probably close to where it should be, maybe even with the 4 years since that last conversation, maybe a little bit low, but I think we're in good shape.
Thank you for that correction. And that's where I got that number
Yeah.
from, was how we were low that much. So these different options, even with these options at the 2.4, we still need to put money into the cash balance, we believe. So because at 2.4, where we are now, or project to be, I think you're right. We're going to be below what they would recommend. So.
And there's going to be things that happen.
Right. So these are the 4 options that we bring to you. With that information, I feel a lot better about not dropping the Cume Bridge rate, because that's $150,000 that would lower the accumulation. That's just my opinion. And we're going to do what?
I know Brandon's here. Brandon, will you come forward, please, and speak on it?
In 2015, the county executive commissioners reestablished the Cume Bridge rate at the 0.0534. A couple years later, it was entered accidentally into the system at a lower rate, and that reduced the revenue for the Cume Bridge Fund. I know it was $900,000 over 2 years. So last year, because if you collect it at a lower rate, accidentally or on purpose, to get it back to the rate that you want, you have to go through the process. You have to have a public hearing. And so commissioners did that last year for 2022 to reestablish it at the 0534. Our next bridge that we're working on right now in design and permitting, Eel River Bridge, $840,000. The last Eel River Bridge that we replaced, just over $1 million. And we've got, over the next, call it 5 years, we've got 5 Eel River bridges planned that need replacement. So I would just ask that you not reduce the property tax money that's, planned for infrastructure. I would ask you to not cut that. Fund things other than infrastructure. It's pretty important. When I started here 20 years ago, we had 17 bridges posted for weight limits. And we've made significant progress with that so that all of our farm tractors and milk trucks and grain vehicles can get across our bridges safely. And I think that's a noble accomplishment for us. And we did it all with local funds. So
What's your cash balance?
it's healthy right now, but again, we have a
Right.
$800,000 bridge. I don't know what that today.
$1,427,896.
And I know
Minus
time,
800,000.
I know times years ago, especially in the winter time, if our El McCoy wasn't real busy, sometimes we got a pretty good deal and we did 2 or 3 bridges in one winter, which hits that account pretty hard.
Yeah, on average, we've replaced 2 bridges every year since at least 1998. We have 87 bridges total. So if you replace 2 bridges a year, you're on about a 43-year cycle. If we go back to an old rate and you get to where you can only afford to replace 1 bridge a year, now you're at an 87-year cycle and bridges just can't sustain that lifespan. So.
And
Any questions of Brandon?
No, I thought that was a good explanation.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other department heads here that would like to speak on the possibility of a 2% reduction in the amount that you presented in your budget?
I think we need to. Just will note that in some departments, they budgeted for a higher pay raise increase or cost of living. So that 2% will be absorbed by.
I don't think we advertised that amount though, didn't we?
I advertised the 4.5%, which I haven't advertised yet because we needed to have this meeting before I could advertise. So, but when at the previous meeting, you had just suggested to just advertise at the 4.5%, but that obviously necessarily did not mean that that's what we were going to adopt.
So for some smaller departments, that will absorb the 2%.
That's very possible.
The numbers that the number that I gave you though is with a 2% increase. So that is the. I took the 4.5% out of the equation and I'm giving you the numbers after just a 2%. Yeah. So that does not include.
Oh, so the budget numbers that will come forth for each department do not include any of those higher ones.
No.
So I withdraw my statement. It will not help. Because she's already reducing in the proposed everyone.
Yeah,
to
that's
2%.
that's what I thought before you said that. That wasn't added in. And we still don't know what our actual numbers are.
Right.
So a lot of it is very fluid yet.
Yeah. We honestly think income will exceed the DLGF numbers, but we have to build the budget within their recommendation. And whether DLGF likes it or not, in the past, we have done additional appropriations as necessary if the funds are there.
And I think that's what we need to keep in mind too, is that this money that we're looking to siphon here and there goes into county general, and that money would be available then back to, let's say, any one of the departments that had to squeeze a 2% reduction. That money after this budget would pass would still be there for those reappropriations. I'm sorry, you wanted to speak.
Yep, and this is worst case scenario for the 2022 budget. We obviously at the end of every year don't necessarily spend every single penny. This would be spending every single penny in the budget that we budget for. In the last few years, that has not been the case. So that also, makes it fluctuate as well. These are rough numbers with doing what I can in Gateway. So.
Other than any numbers that we've talked about today, has there been anything changed about the budget from any department since we last met and talked about the budget and how it was going to be presented? Has there been any changes?
So I think, so our revenue, so our supplemental lit, we get an additional payment every year. That was one of the things that was down it went from, I think I had that on a previous paper, but it was down like $400,000. I think, Jim, you mentioned that. And then again, the additional budgeting for community corrections, obviously, which, I'm glad we have that, but that has caused the cash balance to go down as well. Just several different factors, and everything seems to be trending downward. Our max levy is lower. Because the way that the state gives you your max levy, they include a $616,000 amount for development, disabled, or mental health, and you can claim up to that. But we only pay, I think, $229,000 for Bowen Center for that. So we can only have $229,000 of that $616,000, even though they add it into our max levy. So the max levy amount that they really get is actually not necessarily what we're going to get. So that also, kind of changed what our max levy was as well since we last met. After talking to George.
So, Jana, do you have the number of our estimated combined income sources to put against these total options?
So we're just, so our estimated miscellaneous revenue is the $6,450,210.
Okay.
So you would take that and then add whatever levies is decided, and that would be your revenue.
So again, let me ask another question. The only balanced budget then, is that option one? Adding the 6,450 and the 7,280?
Which one are you talking?
The 6,450 miscellaneous revenue. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong line. So all of these options still eat into our reserves.
Potentially.
Yes, potentially. Certainly other proposals could be made, Mr. Chair. Just recommendations some of us worked on.
Yes. And we're in a give and take atmosphere here. So it's anybody that has anything to bring forward, now's the time, because we need to pass something on this today. We could craft something out of some of the information you've put together too, if there's something. I think we've got a couple solid options, but if there's something as far as one of the pieces of it that anyone feels that there's an issue with, that where we should not touch, or we should touch a little bit harder, we can craft that at this point also.
With the committee of three, and I really appreciate the work that you have put into it. Is there a recommendation that you make?
There's three of us, so there'll probably be three recommendations. I am reluctant to cut infrastructure. And I am very hopeful that this is a very low estimate. So personally, but not speaking for the three of us, I would recommend option two. And it would be with the reassessment at 200,000. So it would be the 5,015,814, but that's personal. That's not speaking for the three of us.
Tom or Jim?
I agree on, Brandon, on your number. I had forgotten that the .036 was a mistake a year or two ago. And I do know what those bridges cost, you know. And then if you have an emergency, I was telling these guys yesterday that I remember we had a huge culvert down south of Whitley that cost a lot of money. It was flood, emergency, had to be replaced. So I would not want to cut that infrastructure because your balance is not even 1.5 bridges right now. So I don't have any problems. I would, with Kim's assistant, her department, I would, the 200,000, and we slowly draw that down and see how each year goes. I would be okay with that. And then Scott's gone, but the health department, we're been a year and a half of, and we don't know what that's going to be, but when you carry in $500,000 or more balance, and it can stay there, and his revenue was up considerably, so you know, I think we can take 100,000 and see what happens with that. And I think he still has enough money to fund the WIC and so forth when he comes back next month. So.
And my part of it, I have to give Tim and Jim credit, they did most of the legwork. They just brought me in to, I think, check to make sure they were thinking the right way. So, I don't want to take away from bridge fund. I never realized we had 87 bridges in Whitley County. So no, we're not going to change that. And Kim and the health department really appreciate what you can do for the county. I mean, I know I don't want to take you to zero because we had that discussion also. And we can't do that. We're not going to do that. We want to make
You
sure.
mean on yearly,
Yeah,
yearly monies?
yeah. Go ahead.
I just have an additional question. I would not have to, in addition to what you're proposing, make the additional.
Correct. Norwood Community Corrections, the health department, and obviously it doesn't apply to the cumulative fund. Just as a couple of more comments, we looked at 5% across the board, and it just seemed like it was going to be impossible to do that. That would affect personnel dramatically because we understand that we need to do a cost of living, and the choices are just not easy at this point. And again, hopefully the revenue will significantly exceed DLGF's projection.
Personally, from listening to what has transpired on it, I'm very comfortable with the 2% reduction with each department and through their elected officials on it. And Tim backed me up on this, or Kim backed me up on this. At one time in the past, we required our departments to do a 20% reduction in budgets, and that was a 2-year project in a row. So I think the 2% is very workable.
Janet, you've already changed. You took all the 4% raises out and the budget reflects just 2% everywhere. Okay.
I think, I don't have anything to contradict anything we've talked about, only I would make sure, and I'm sure that Kim will, that we monitor that very closely and make sure we keep an eye on how that account moves, because we don't want it to get back to a point to where it was. And it got there because it was moved before and then it was just forgotten about. So. And yeah, and I don't want to see that happen because I know by the time when you came in and you figured that out, it was almost to the point where it was panic mode. Yeah. So I can go along with that. I still am going to be very optimistic about the fact that I do too believe with the projection of the economy and other indicators that I think that this is probably a very conservative number that they're telling us that we need to stay within. I think we'll be all right. But we have to prepare for that. And we also still will be drawing that money back into county general, will be available to us to give back to these departments as they have the needs moving forward. So I guess at this time I would open up the floor for any motions that you
If I
would care
can
to
just
make.
make one more comment. We need to have on our calendar to be looking specifically at these various levies that we've adjusted and recognize ahead of time in the budget process. Are they going to need, and is it appropriate? Because we'll have to go through the process of the rate change for each of these that we have changed. And we just need to keep that in mind in that process.
But that's not always been a part of the process.
Well,
Could it be incorporated automatically? So we're looking at that next year before we really start the budget talks.
yeah, yep, and I gave this to you guys last year too, when we were doing the budget, when we were working on it. And I will say too, you know, as we had talked about before, the state had kind of recommended us push everything back. I also want to say that they want us to push everything forward, push everything up, like our public hearing and our adoption and all that. But they're still sending information that's vital to our budget out around the same time during the year. So I'm gonna say until they give us information that we need that's vital to our budget, that we leave it as it was last year. Because it obviously didn't work this year because they didn't give me stuff when we actually needed it to figure out what we needed to do for our budget. So I do think that we need to, for next year, I would ask that, you know, obviously we'll decide that next year, but we need to leave it in September and October.
We just want everyone to know that we're going to be looking at accumulated funds and ask people to spend those to what you feel is a reasonable amount over time, over the next years. Mr. Chairman, do you want the numbers included in the motion?
I think for clarity and transparency, that would be very appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that the levy for county general fund be $5,015,814. That the levy for the cumulative bridge fund be $892,319. The cumulative capital development fund be $2,500.
250,000.
Yes, 250,000, I'm sorry. Yeah, my wife said I was not the right guy to be working on a budget. Health Department, 500,000. Reassessment, 200,000. Community Services, 20,000, and County 4-H, 20,000.
You want to add the COLA into your,
Put it in the same motion, that makes sense. And the 2% cost of living for all county employees. With the exception of part-time? Or do we give part-time?
part-time is a hourly scale that's set up separately on a salary ordinance.
So all full-time employees? 2% cost of living.
So reduction or no? I know we talked about it. Those were the three things. On budgets.
2%. Oh, yes, you're right. Sorry. And a 2% reduction in budgets for all departments with the exception of the health department, the assessor's office, and community corrections.
So that will change these numbers because that included everyone just a little bit, but I just wanted to make a note of that.
I believe that's the whole motion. No,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Would you repeat that? No. I'll second-
Jana will repeat it.
I'll second the motion.
So I do have a motion, a second, open for further discussion. The only thing that I would add to this is we were going to have to take into consideration, as Kim had mentioned, have legal check out. Are we allowed to go to the 200 or is it going to have to remain at the 400? So that is a variable that could come into play here yet.
And I would accept that as an amendment.
Second the amendment.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to the vote. All those in favor, please respond by raising your right hand. And those opposed, the same. Let it be shown it was passed unanimously with all members present. And I think that brings us to the commissioner report, please.
Okay, I just have a few items for the commissioners. The first one I have is the ARP fund has been funded. The treasurer did get the money for half of it, which is around 3.1 million, I think is what that ended up being. But we're not doing anything with that. We're waiting for a final determination of the rules. The state still hasn't come up with final determination of what we can use it for and what we can't, and plus recommendations from Baker Tilly. Hopefully we can use those funds, some of those funds, for the shortfall that we have for community corrections. That's the one thing that will help out tremendously with the budget also. Any questions on that at all? The next I have, if you hear about a READY grant, that the state has got $50 million for regions, that they're providing $50 million for projects to whether it be quality of life, any type of project that you want to have for your communities. You've got to understand that it's an 80% match. They pay 20% and we have to come up with 80%. So it's not, I mean, it's nice that they're coming up with this, but it's not a great match for it. Health Insurance Trust Fund. We've requested that Unified, who determines, who works with our health trust, and they keep a balance of 500,000 in that trust. Now, what happens is that trust is funded by whether we use the monies that our payments to the trust is 140,000 a month. If it isn't used by our employees, then it keeps building up in that trust fund. That trust pays up to $80,000. We're self-funded, so we're self-funded up to $80,000 for our insurance, and anything over $80,000, a third party pays for that. We've got a third party insurance for that. So the commissioners have determined that we're going to keep $500,000 in this trust so that if an emergency comes up, that we have a lot of claims that come in from our employees that we're covered, that we don't have to borrow money like we did before. Plus making sure that we fund the claims that we have coming in for that month. So the remainder of this we can use to pay back our payments. We can use it for the payments on our health insurance. So right now we have 1.1 million in that fund. So we should be able to use approximately $400,000 to $500,000 at this point to fund our health insurance. Our health insurance budget is about 1.4. So it's a significant savings for this year and hopefully for next year. No guarantees on anything, but we have been able to use, I think last year we had $600,000 that we paid out of that trust fund. It's a little confusing, but
Can that money be used, or have we used it to help offset the employee's contribution?
it cannot be used for that. It has to be used. There's only certain things that we can use it for. It's kind of like the assessor's funding when we have to go through Unified for anything that we do.
The one thing that is probably not part of your report, but the one thing that we haven't talked about or heard anything about was what the projected cost was going to be, if any, to an employee's contribution. Do we have any information on that?
Not yet. We will have that. Right now, because of the fact that we're so healthy in that, I don't think we're going to change the contributions
I was going to say, if we're doing this well, because, I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand.
Right, right. And we've been able to do that for a few years here. Our employees are very fortunate. I think the singles pay $29 every paycheck. And you compare that to other employers, and we treat our people very well. But they deserve it. The next thing I have is just a report that the jail project is still going forward. We've got, we're pretty well whittled down to 2 for our architectural firms that we're going to work with, and we're looking at possibly going to using a contractor that would be not at risk, but owner that would report to the owner, who would be the county on that. So there's 5 different ways that you can fund that, and I think we've got that down to where we need to be. So that should be going forward here real soon. We'll have council. I think Jim's been involved in it a little bit with, he's gone to the jail, some of the jail projects that we've been looking at. But that'll be going forward. We're happy to see that go forward. We've still got some issues in the jail with overcrowding in the jail. We've been trying to find different places to send some of the inmates, and everybody's booked. There's no way that we can do anything right now. One of the problems that we have is I think we've got about 67 level 6 felonies in the jail, which used to go to DOC, and DOC now sends them back to us, and they won't take anybody. And if we didn't have that 67, the state's caused this whole problem for everybody. And almost all 92 counties have got the same issue.
I have a question that I don't know if George or Jana or the sheriff, are we receiving our payments from the state regularly for those that we're housing, or?
Yeah, but not all of them we get paid for anymore.
Right.
We are usually about 3 months behind with the state.
So, but
Like George was saying, plenty of those level 6s out of the 67 are sentenced right now. And back in the day, they would took those 20, we had 20 out of jail.
but it's not like the health department where with WIC, they haven't sent anything for a while.
No, we've still been getting, they're just behind. Sometimes
Okay.
up to 6 months, because we're running about 2 weeks.
Thank you.
That's all we've got.
Thank you, George. Any questions for George? Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from last month's meeting? And are there any additions or corrections as they were presented to you?
I make a motion, we accept the meetings from the July 7th meeting.
Second.
The motion is second to accept the minutes as presented. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to the vote. All those in favor, please respond by raising your right hand. And so we have 6 members that voted it for, and Councilman Barrett abstained. Councilman Barrett.
I have nothing.
So what's our schedule now for the budget? We have to advertise it, correct? And so what schedule are we on now?
Well, so I think our public hearing is going to be at our September meeting now. I have to advertise 10 days before the public hearing, 10 calendar days. So would you still like me to leave it at the 4.5%, I guess? Or would you just like me to advertise what we just approved? I can do either, but.
I think leaving it open by advertising at the 4.5% would be appropriate.
And there's no time crunch that it has to be done before the September 4-year schedule, right?
Right, yep, because the questions that I needed today were answered in order to advertise. So,
The only thing I have, Sheriff's got a question here, but I thank Kim for her time. And Brandon, we talked to you yesterday and so forth. And I know Paula, you spent some extra time, so we appreciate that.
Yes, Mark?
So that's what I do a question for the department heads. Are we getting our budgets back and then they have to be back by a certain time with our recommendations back to you for the 2% reduction?
yeah, I will send I will do all the budgets at a 2% increase for salaries, and then I will send a Form 1 to you, or the salary, I'm sorry, location summary of what it would look like, and then that'll be over our budget, and then just take a 2%. So I will.
Our time might be back for the next week. What is our time?
Yeah.
As a recommendation.
Before we adopt. But probably, I would like them probably back before the September meeting, but we would definitely have to have them before we obviously adopt the budget. So, which is the October meeting.
Let me clarify. So you're going to send something to all the department heads telling them that to reduce by 2% and get those totals back to you. So then you can prepare that to have
Okay.
available at the September 6th meeting. And the department heads can expect that information within,
I'm hopefully I can get it either to tomorrow or Thursday.
by the end of this week. Does that answer your question, Mark?
Yeah, but should we have it back to you guys, full council, in another week or so you guys can look at it for the next two and say yay or nay, so we know?
I think that, and I don't want to speak for council, my opinion would be, I think that it would be up to you to where you're going to take that 2% from. I don't think that we're going to oversee and tell you, no, don't take it from there, you need to take it from here. That'd be your job as a department head. So let's set then with Jana, when do you need, after you've gotten the information to them by the end of the week, when do you request that it come back? And this will all be shared when the information is sent to you, Mark, but we'll just make it part of the meeting too.
So back by August 23rd would be a good date to keep, or to have them back.
And I think just to note that we concurred with what the chairman said about we don't want to micromanage this 2%. That's a department head
It's up to
responsibility.
the department heads, elected officials.
Councilman Warren?
I drew the short straw again. In June, the Personnel Committee met and we have some recommendations for you. First, the Sheriff's Department requested a security officer, and that was unanimously agreed upon. The recommendation to make an existing part-time position into a full-time position. And WIS recommended the salary as a civilian poll 2 with a rate of $50,282. And does this reflect, did we reflect it? No, we didn't reflect this in the budget because we had not approved it yet.
Are those in your budget, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, that's, I
Okay.
thought we,
It is in
Okay.
there.
we had you do that early enough so
I was gonna double
they
check.
are in your budget.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Also, for the Sheriff's Department, we unanimously agreed to recommend a new position of captain be created, and it will replace the previously approved deputy sergeant. WIS recommends this salary at $62,312. And again, there was a supplement to the sergeant's salary is in there and an additional amount to make that person a captain, correct? So that is in the budget as well. Emergency management, requested an EMA specialist, and it was unanimously agreed not to recommend a new position request at this time. There's a deputy director position that, to my knowledge, still remains open.
It's not filled yet.
So we see no point in adding a third person at this time in particular. And then the part-time lead breastfeeding counselor from health in the WIC department was agreed to recommend the job title change from breastfeeding peer counselor. It's now lead breastfeeding counselor. So it's just a title change. And then we have what Scott said today about the finances of that. And we would these are recommendations on these two for the sheriff's department because they are in the budget. We recommend that we approve these changes. And we also recommend the job title change as well. Should I put that in the form of a motion?
Yes, please.
Make a motion that we change a part-time security officer position to a full-time position with a salary at a civilian Pole 2 rate at $50,282 at this time. And I make a motion that we approve a captain's position in lieu of a sergeant's position and the additional funds necessary that are budgeted to accomplish that with a salary of $62,312. And I recommend the job title change to lead breastfeeding counselor from breastfeeding peer counselor.
Does that complete your motion?
I hope so.
Okay. Does anybody notice any weaknesses in the motion that may have been left out from prior discussion of? Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
I have a motion, a second, so further discussion. So your motion is for those positions to be changed and filled immediately or with the new budget cycle? Okay, is that what your expectation was, Mark? Okay. Any further discussion? All those, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor, please respond by raising your right hand. And those opposed, the same. Let it be shown it was passed unanimously with all board members present. Anything else, sir?
No, sir.
Vice
Thank you.
Chair Wheeler?
I have none.
And I have nothing. We will stand adjourned.